take the draw. Maxime does just that, unlike in the Hollywood film. And we see the lead remain 1 point for Magnus Carlsen, but Maxime Vachier-Lagrave showing he is not going down without a fight, and he just gave Magnus all he could handle in that game.
That was just a high-level game of chess. It was an interesting opening. It was a cagey middle game. You could argue that MVL had the advantage throughout the game, but that decision to sacrifice the queen, that's what makes the world champion special. Just the understanding that he would have enough activity with his pieces. It's among the hardest decisions you can make in chess, when to sack the queen for a rook and a piece, Robert, because often that just loses the game on the spot. Great stuff from both players. The score is 1.5-1/2 in Magnus's favor.
Yeah, we like to call that a great practical decision by Magnus to give up the queen. And for Maxime, well, I like that he's going back to his opening from game one. The opening was not the problem. That's not the reason he lost. Sometimes you have a result impact your psychology. No, the opening was fine. But look at Magnus. He's just playing this calmly. H3, keeping the tension. Last time we saw D takes C4 happen and Magnus took with the knight. That's not going to happen in this game because you don't have C5 as a follow-up. You've already committed your A pawn. So one thing that Black will try is A5 to A4 at the right moment, trying to develop the rook on its starting square.
But there's just something about Black's minor pieces here that are reminiscent of, I don't know, middle schoolers at a dance. There's just a kind of inherent awkwardness. That bishop on F5 doesn't have a way back. The bishop on G7 is biting on granite. White has slightly better control of the center. So MVL has deviated from game one in that he's played C7, C6 rather than his approach in that game, which was to actually take on C4. It's a Slav setup. It's a very solid setup, but do you kind of see what I'm saying, Robert? It's just a little bit harder to handle Black's pieces here. Maybe knight F6 to E4 is what the doctor ordered, and you called it, A4.
Well, one thing I'm worried about for Black is his bishop on F5. You highlighted this in the previous game. G4 is even an idea for White, because where's the bishop going? If it goes to E6 or to E4, the knight in F3 hops to G5 and is going to take that bishop off the board. So maybe first you have to deal with some of the things happening on the queen side here. A4 to A3 is possible. A takes B could be a bit annoying. So even B takes A4. I know often we don't like to take that pawn, doubling our own, because BA4, Queen A5 looks like the response is to gain that pawn back. But the B7 pawn is the target, and very importantly, the bishop on F5. It's not stable. G2 to G4 looks like a viable option.
I'll show this on the analysis board. It's a great point. B takes A4 always has to be considered. Then you have to start calculating. Queen A5. The good thing for Black is that if White blindly goes, that's a free pawn. No, it's not. Rook FB8, Queen C7, and at the very least, you can take B2. Robert, apparently, did White have something in this position?
Queen B3.
What a move! What a find! Queen B3! And if you take it, the rook on A8 is pinned. You're a beast. So you have to go with the other rook. You have to play Queen B7, Rook AB8. Wow.
That is actually a sick line. I'm glad we were able to show that. I don't think that there's going to be this variation, but that is some cool stuff showing that usually you go Rook F to B8 to trap the queen, but here the Rook on A8 being loose allowed White to sack the queen and with great effect. So what a line.
Oh my God, Queen B3, and the queen extricates itself from danger. Okay, back we go to the live board. That was fun, but he's not playing B takes A4. And as we're talking, Magnus is thinking. He's taking the longest think of the match thus far as he drops now to 2:45 on his clock, and B4 is his decision.
Yeah, I think that I don't hate it, even though the eval bar is saying that was wrong, because now this pawn A3, it's a long-term weakness. You've gained some space, but if pieces get traded off the board, the A3 pawn's a target. As you're highlighting, that knight can just hop right around into White's position. That is the downside of allowing the pawn to go all the way up there.
Yeah, that pawn is an anchor point. You could actually get your knight conceivably to the B2 square and then maybe even around to D3. So Black has positioned his pawns in kind of a weird-looking way where they are weaknesses, right? They need to be defended carefully, but they can also serve as anchor points for outposts for Black's knight. Let's see which side of these pawns prevails.
By the way, C5 looks impossible because both B4 and D4 cover the square, but because there's a pin on the diagonal, Black could consider the move C6 to C5, chiseling out White's center. Now, Magnus is a big decision here. His knight on F3 is under attack. Does he want to go forward, knight to E5? I don't like the look of that, because after the swap on E5 of knights, the queen goes to C7, and E5 is immediately threatened. So I think the knight has to retreat somewhere. The question is where?
He retreats it to D2. You now have to reckon with the idea of G4 knocking the bishop away from its defensive E4. Although in some of these positions, we see Black sacrificing a pawn like that in order to induce a weakening of white's kingside. I think Magnus has the slightly more comfortable game, and MVL definitely the one who's got to make a couple really committal decisions in the next few moves, Robert.
Yeah, not easy. G4, a big threat. As you're saying, sometimes you allow that to happen, and you just give the pawn. Look, knight of 6, defending the pawn. G4 followed by G5 wins the E4 pawn, but it gives up H3, and you do not want to see that happen. So I think that white should play the simple chess. Rook to B1, rook to B3, and maybe queen C1 at some point. I know I'm just focusing on that A3 pawn because I said it could be a weakness, but how are you going to keep it defended?
Hey, as Abraham Lincoln said, a pawn is a pawn is a pawn. You want to get that rook around. He gets his queen to B3, which serves two purposes. First of all, knight D2 to B1 is a distinct possibility. Once you win this pawn, the floodgates kind of open on the queen side. The second idea, of course, is to keep pushing on the queen side with B4, B5, and maybe even carve out the B4 square for the bishop. So you can combine these two ideas, and you're essentially asking black, what are you going to do to me on the king side? Is MVL going to go like H5, Queen D7, King's Indian attack style? Well, I don't think that's effective either. White can also always drop a bishop back to F1, Robert, to prevent any shenanigans on H3.
Well, he's not just H5. What if he had started with Queen D7? Because bishop takes H3 felt like a threat, even if it didn't lead to checkmate. So in this order, you're 100% correct, Danya. Queen D7 can always be met. Or Queen C8, interesting move. I think you want to stay out of the rook's path, but bishop F1 looks very pleasant for white. G5, G4, it just feels a little bit slow for black, but at the same time, it's blitz chess, and Magnus Carlsen down just to a minute and 28 seconds.
And he says, I'm not afraid of bishop takes H3. Come at me, because the bishop on E2 in the resulting position is going to guard this very important G4 square. Moreover, even if black does play knight G4, it won't carry a threat because the knight on F1 is the real hero of the king side. B5 by Magnus. Start your engines on the queen side, and MVL's got to make some decisions here, and he's got to make them quickly. C5 is his response. Taking a bishop D4 or bishop B4.
Exactly. Nice move at knight D7. He wants the C5 pawn back, and he's getting it. And the A3 pawn is better protected because the dark square bishop's off the board.
But what about a move? I was thinking maybe C6 and B6, but you're probably going to end up losing that pawn. Oh, B6 threatens C5, and you can't take because of the fork on C5.
I feel like that was
C3.
That was intuition by Magnus. He played C6, and now he's thinking. I think he thought C6 is the best move. Let's play it because you've secured yourself a passed pawn. If that pawn were back on B7, your quote-unquote passed pawn on the C file is stuck in place. Now, even after a swap on B5, the C4 pawn takes back. You have a clear passed pawn. So great decision by Magnus, even if he didn't have a follow-up ready. But what is that follow-up? Rook C1. That is a good, strong, stable move. And Danya, white is essentially up a pawn because black has these double E pawns, whereas white has a passer on the queen side.
He might be up a pawn virtually, but he's down 2 minutes on the clock. Let's see how Magnus handles, I would say for the first time in 3 matches, a situation where he's got 20 seconds to his opponent's 2.5 minutes. MVL, he's playing quickly, and I love the way he's managing his time early in the match, but can he actually cash that in?
C5. I think Magnus plays C5 here because that forces CB, and then bishop takes B5 back, and white's pieces are getting active, and you're springing for your passed pawn. The move is not liked by the computer.
But the knight is starting to sink its teeth into that D3 square. There's also the old idea of queen C8 and bishop takes H3, which is much stronger now with the knight being able to access F3. 8 seconds as Magnus blitzes out rook D4.
Wow, bishop takes H3 is so tempting here.
Oh,
Maxime refrains. C5 is protected for now, but rook C8?
C8? How do you defend it? Oh my goodness, this might be getting out of control for Magnus.
Maxime totally turned this game around. What play by him?
And just take it with your queen? Or do you go knight takes C6? Knight C6 looks flimsy. Another great move. Take C1. He's winning.
Wow, he's completely winning. He's demolishing
dropping on the clock. And he's losing on time. He's losing on the board. I think knight C6 was a fork.
Oh my gosh. The queen trade. E7 falls, but A2 is loose. No, this is over.
No, rook A1 pinning the knight. Magnus pinned 7 ways to Sunday here. He can't even move.
No, he cannot. And the A3 pawn will remain. Where else could
rook A1?
He might go rook B2 and knight D3 and just go after the F2 pawn. But
no, but give me a downside to rook A1.
He goes for it.
I don't like that at all. You don't want to give Magnus a second chance. The guy can pull anything out of a hat.
And if knight D3, bishop C4, knight takes A2, rook A2 forces the rooks off. I know black is up 2 pawns, but with double pawns, that might give Magnus chances. He goes rook A7. He's going for the attack.
Listen, MVL is playing with some serious fire. Now his material advantage has been reduced. Rook B2 was unthinkable. Rook A1 was resign time. and all of a sudden it's a game again. He should still win, of
Magnus
course.
down to 3 seconds. Rook A6. He wants Rook A2, perhaps. He has that in his back pocket. If he wants to trade rooks, he goes Rook A5 with the pin. Bishop E6.
Careful.
Oh, that's
Bishop
also
D3 and E4 was the threat. He's going to lose on
G4.
time.
But H2, you
No,
can't
knight
take back
F3.
into Rook G2.